transport, production, and the use of energy have an enormous impact on the environment and its ecosystems. A huge part of our global energy supply is still powered by fossil fuels. We must assume that the global hunger for energy will only increase in the coming decades. How can we prevent the rapid growth of harmful greenhouse gases? Where are the small and large solutions? And are people willing to go along with it? That's our topic for today. Hello and welcome to Eco India. I'm Sanuta Raghu. 3 billion people around the world rely on wood, coal, charcoal, or animal waste for their cooking and heating needs, according to the UN. Many people living in the Indian Himalayas are among them. Extreme cold temperatures make indoor heating a necessity, and the unavailability of modern energy services leads to an excessive reliance on fossil fuels. An organization in the region is helping change this with what could be a viable alternative.
Farmer Uma Thakur and her family want to be as warm as possible in their apartment. Their traditional Bukhari stove is used for heating and cooking. Unfortunately, the burner consumes a lot of wood.
When it snows, we sometimes need to keep it on for 3 days straight. We also use it for cooking, for heating water, and making bread.
Winters are long and hard in the Himalayan region of the northern Indian state of Himachal Pradesh. And it's mostly the women who collect the wood, strenuous work that's also time-consuming.
We collect firewood all year round. Come winter, come summer. Whenever we women have time to spare, we head to the forest to gather wood.
Costing up to 5,000 rupees, some 60 euros, the demand for Bukharis peaks during the winter months. Locals are less likely to use electricity or liquid petroleum gas for heating or devices like continuous flow water heaters, which are costly. The apparent abundance of wood makes the Bukharis an easier and cheaper option.
In winter, I sell between 150 and 200 Bukharis. If you use it from 8 in the morning to 8 at night, you end up using at least 30 to 40 kilos of wood per day.
All in all, the stove's fuel consumption has a very negative impact. It contributes greatly to deforestation in Himachal Pradesh. Forests are also cleared to make way for fields or roads or fall prey to fires. And the need for firewood, like that of the Thakur families, is even greater in the Himalayas than in most other regions of India.
If we talk about Himachal Pradesh, so on an average, every household is using 2,700 kg of wood in a year. And if we connect this to the deforestation is about 0.34% in 10 years time span.
This corresponds to an area of almost 50 square kilometers or over 6,000 soccer pitches. And there's another problem. Soot is produced during combustion. After carbon dioxide and methane, soot is considered the third most potent climate killer. Soot covers the snow and ice on glaciers. The darker surface absorbs more sunlight. That makes the ice melt faster. The reason for all the soot is the incomplete combustion of wood in the stoves. That can also cause serious health damage and premature death.
Inefficient combustion of the wood can lead you to some particulate matters, some NOx and carbon monoxide, which are very dangerous to a human being.
This novel stove should help solve the problems, the Himalayan rocket stove. The name comes from the sound it sometimes makes. Instead of one combustion chamber, it has two. Wood burns more efficiently and cleanly with up to 80 to 90% less soot, according to the manufacturer, and uses significantly less wood.
The Himalayan rocket stove uses half as much wood as a Bukhari needs.
Keelong, the capital of the northernmost district of Himachal Pradesh, is completely snowed in. Farmer Chelingpa also sells small everyday items. Now he's trying to clear the entrance for customers.
When up to 15 centimeters of snow settles, we are completely housebound and unable to venture out. We get cut off from the rest of the world.
Outside, it's well below -10 degrees Celsius. The family has purchased a Himalayan rocket stove as wood is particularly scarce here and extremely expensive to buy. But the family also wants to heat in a way that's better for them and the environment.
We need less wood and it heats better. It works well for the entire family. If the smoke emissions are lower, it's of course a good thing for the environment as well.
The stove company sees itself as a social enterprise, and it has already created 20 full-time jobs. It sells the steel stoves in other parts of the region as well.
The Himalayan rocket stove is being used in 6,500 houses currently, from Ladakh to Kashmir, Sikkim, Bhutan and Nepal, to Shimla and Kinnaur in Himachal, of course.
This model costs about 3 times more than a Bukhari, one reason why the efficient stove is only slowly catching on. Yet, the manufacturers say you can recoup the cost over about 2 years through savings on wood purchases. Back to the Thakur family, word of the new oven hasn't reached them yet. It's questionable whether the family could even afford the €175 for the device. But it would certainly make life for the women in the family much easier.
In the debate about sustainable energy transition, solar energy can't be ignored. Now, the technology is developed on such an advanced level that it can be used on both a small and a large scale. By the end of 2020, according to a study, almost 30% of our global electricity generation came primarily from wind and solar energy. Our reporter took a closer look at the clean energy of the sun.
Solar energy is pretty amazing. Its generation is emissions-free and it's really cheap. But if something sounds too good to be true, there's gotta be a catch, right? First, let's take a look at solar energy's impact on the climate. Solar panels produce electricity without creating emissions, which sounds pretty awesome, but it's also not the whole story. Producing them in particular uses lots of energy. Raw materials have to be mined, transported, processed, then the whole thing has to be assembled. And as our economy is still largely run on fossil fuel, all this means greenhouse gas emissions. But the question is, how much? And how much is that compared to other sources of energy? Well, to answer that, there's a thing called
life cycle assessment.
This is Gavin Heath, who's been studying this for many years, so we'll just let him explain how it works.
In the context of electricity generation, the service that's being provided is the generation of a kilowatt hour. The role of life cycle assessment is to do as comprehensive and complete an accounting of, for instance, the greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted that are attributable to that kilowatt hour.
The results are this. On average, solar energy emits around 40 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour it produces, which is really, really low compared to fossil fuels like natural gas at 500 grams or coal at 1,000. But then again, sun power does emit a little bit more CO2 than wind power. What do we make of that?
It shouldn't really be a choice at this point of life cycle greenhouse gas emissions between different renewables. They all provide significant benefit when displacing conventional.
What's more is that solar energy has been becoming more and more efficient, which could further push down life cycle emissions. So yes, strictly speaking, solar energy isn't completely emissions-free, but it is already one of the climate-friendliest energy sources we have. Next up, let's take a look at what actually goes into making all these panels. To produce solar cells, you need quite a few chemical substances. For example, the process of refining the silicon produces silicon tetrachloride. It can be recycled and then reused, but it's not really clear whether manufacturers always do that. If it ends up in the water, it can have devastating effects on the environment and people's health. Or take hydrofluoric acid, which is needed to clean the solar wafers during production. It's a highly corrosive acid that needs to be handled very carefully.
We have a lot of hazardous chemicals of concern that are used to make solar panels.
This is Sheila Davis of the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition. She developed the solar scorecard that ranks manufacturers by their sustainability.
We don't want to solve the climate problem at the expense of other important environmental issues, like hazardous waste issues or resource issues or chemical issues that are toxic issues. And that's pretty much the problem with solar. So it is green, but it's only green in one phase. We want to make sure it's green throughout its life cycle.
Another problem is that, depending on the type of solar cell and manufacturer, hazardous materials like lead, cadmium or arsenic can end up in the modules. But increasingly, there are also alternatives.
And one of the key components of finding safer alternatives is being able to perform what they call an alternative chemical assessment. And luckily, right now, we have the capacity to do this.
So yes, the chemicals needed to make solar cells are problematic. There really needs to be pressure on the industry to come up with alternatives and make the switch once they find them. And finally, let's take a look at where all these panels go to die. Solar panels last around 30 years, often even longer. But at some point, they reach the end of their life. As of now, the waste heap of discarded panels is still relatively low, about 250,000 metric tons. But by 2050, it's expected to grow up to 78 million metric tons. That would be more than 200 Empire State Buildings of old solar panels.
Well, now we can see that it's going to be a problem, but of course in the next 10 years or 15 years is going to be a major crisis.
Where old panels would pile onto the mountains of e-waste we are already struggling to deal with. The good news is that solar panels are recyclable, and it's already being done, mainly in the EU. Governments here made it compulsory for manufacturers to make sure their used panels get recycled. Facilities like this one already recover a good chunk of the materials, but there's also some bad news. The recovered silicon, for example, isn't of high purity yet, which means we can't really use it to make new solar panels. Instead, it goes into other stuff, like shoe soles. And then there's another problem.
The cost of recycling is relatively high, and that's partially at least because there's not yet that many modules to recycle.
This means in places without legislation, like the USA or China, it's still cheaper to throw old modules into landfills, including all the valuable materials they're made with. Recycling needs to become profitable, or we might have a real problem on our hands.
There would be many solar panels that are landfilled. I cannot imagine that.
Yun Luo is the CEO of Rosy Solar, a French startup that's come up with a new recycling process. It focuses on recovering the most valuable materials at high purity. With their recycling method, the company says these materials could be recovered at a profit and then go back into making more solar panels. They're currently working on opening their first plant at the end of 2022. So the good news is that solar panels can be recycled. The bad news is that lots of them aren't yet. So what does all this mean? Well, yes, solar power is not entirely green, but that definitely doesn't mean we should turn our backs on it. Its benefits are way too great for that. Instead, we should openly address its problems and figure out how we can fix them.
Well, what about setting up a few more of these wind turbines? These are not only creating clean electricity, they're also driving the environmental industry and creating new jobs. Experts in Europe believe that a rapid energy transition and a sustainable carbon dioxide policy can only get along with investments in wind turbines. But in France, as in many other European countries, this calculation does not take into account the concerns many people in rural areas have about these projects.
It's 5 in the morning in the town of Erquy in Brittany. Benjamin Gaillard has to start early because there's a storm forecast for midday. The fisherman and tour guide wants to show us the drilling ship that is preparing the holes for wind turbines off the coast.
It is another 3 or 4 kilometers.
This ship is set to drill 190 holes up to 60 meters deep for over 60 offshore wind turbines. Gaillard is worried that the construction work on the seabed will destroy the local aquaculture.
Here in Saint-Brieuc, we mostly fish for scallops. If this is no longer possible because the scallops are inedible, many fishermen will go bankrupt. That is scary. I just bought a new fishing boat last year.
The generous supplies of seafood and fish here are partly due to the fact that for decades the local fishermen have agreed to limit the amounts they catch. They fish sustainably. That makes it all the more bitter for fishermen like Julien Schreichoel that some of them are already feeling the negative effects of the drilling work.
The lobsters hide under stones and big boulders, in places where there is sand and rocks. But recently, a big machine moved the blocks and put them in a different place. The lobsters that have been there for years have fled. The impact on my business will be dramatic.
On its website, however, the Spanish operator praises the project as a means to provide environmentally friendly energy. The company has the support of the French government, which ignores the criticism from local fishermen. The government has even issued the operators a number of special permits that override species protection regulations. The transition to renewables is underway, regardless of whether or not citizens protest. The French Wind Energy Association has made a simple calculation.
Wind turbines produce renewable and CO2 neutral energy. France wants to be carbon neutral within 30 years. That is not possible without wind power.
We're back at the tranquil Saint-Brieuc Bay with its unspoiled nature. Locals can't believe that the plan is to build wind turbines here, of all places. The residents fiercely oppose the construction project.
This is supposed to be sustainable, but in reality it's destroying nature. They need to do something else that is truly ecological.
In Erquy, even environmentalists oppose the wind turbines. They say the location is completely unsuitable for a wind park. And Catherine Pujol says the 20-meter-tall turbines will ruin the unspoiled coastline.
It's scandalous to ruin such a beautiful ocean panorama and turn it into an industrial landscape. This bay is under environmental protection. That includes the coast and the sea all the way out there.
The ship has drilled only a few holes in Saint-Brieuc Bay over the past weeks. The project is way behind schedule. To make matters worse, oil has contaminated the bay during the operation. The drill simply can't get through the hard rocks below.
When you see how slowly this project is progressing, it is clear that it will be some time until the wind park is completed. We have granite and dolerite rock. Brittany's nature simply rejects these offshore wind turbines.
The local fishermen can't believe that the project is moving ahead. And they're certain that ultimately they will win the fight against the wind turbines.
The deeper we get into the subject of sustainable energy management, the more it comes to our mind. To find the balance between environmental friendliness and cost effectiveness is very difficult. But one thing is undisputed. We have to reduce the carbon dioxide in our environment as quickly as possible. Tackling the problem of traffic and transport in megacities is one aspect of this issue. Let's take a look at Bengaluru, a city I grew up in and one of the most congested cities in the world. Can electric vehicles solve some of its traffic problems?
Varsha Rajiv owns an electric motorbike, making her one of a small group of pioneers in the Indian city of Bengaluru. Only about 15,000 of the city's 12 million inhabitants use e-scooters like Varsha's. She travels 30 kilometers to work with it every day. Bengaluru, formerly known as Bangalore, is congested and full of smog. Varsha Rajiv wants to help cut the harmful air pollution. The 26-year-old also preferred a cheaper and climate-friendlier way of getting around.
I was looking to buy a new two-wheeler. The reason why I switched for electric vehicle was, one was the hiked fuel charges, and one more thing is the environmental issue also. It has zero emissions, no pollution. So to contribute towards that, I opted for electric vehicle.
The Indian state of Karnataka aims to turn transport from grey to green by 2030 at the latest. The state capital, Bengaluru, is expected to lead the way. But only 5,000 electric cars are on the roads here right now. Price is a major obstacle. E-cars cost 2 to 3 times as much as their gasoline-powered counterparts. Varsha Rajiv works as a lawyer in a legal firm and can afford to buy this model made by a local manufacturer. But most of the city's inhabitants simply can't afford an e-scooter like hers. Yet, the need for them is huge. 70% of all vehicles in the city are motorbikes and motor scooters. In this unremarkable workshop in the southeast of Bengaluru, businessman Rakesh MK is working on a pragmatic and affordable solution. His Maladeath company converts conventional motorbikes into hybrid ones. They can then run on battery or gasoline as needed. The conversion costs 40,000 rupees or 470 euros.
Retrofitting is a common man's solution. So wherein he has his existing asset and he wants to convert it to an EV. We have a motor which gets fitted onto the existing rear wheel of a scooter, and the controllers will fit into a body of the panel, and a throttle which is unique in our solution, where you have both electric throttle and the IC engine throttle integrated along with the display kit.
Battery range is about 40 kilometers. However, when the gasoline motor is running, it also recharges the battery. Hybrid motorbikes could be an important milestone on the road to green mobility. But that promising future will remain out of reach unless more vehicles go completely electric. Incentives do help. Syed Ashik M doesn't have to pay vehicle tax for his new e-motorbike, though the auto engineer was primarily persuaded by the much cheaper running costs.
Like 200 rupees I need to put petrol. Like compared to electricity, if I am daily charging only, hardly it will be like 20 rupees charge. And electricity also, it is compared to petrol vehicle, electric vehicle is better. So you can save the time also, you can save money also, you can, there is no much about servicing and all in this, so you need to put oil and all.
But while legislation has supported the production of electric vehicles, the city is still in dire need of an extensive charging grid, the lack of which is a major source of anxiety for most. Small neighborhood shops, known as Kirana stores, could be the answer. With some 12 million of them in India, they could drive the shift to electric motorbikes. This small charging unit was manufactured in Bengaluru by the Charger company. It's easily and quickly installed and costs around 3,000 rupees, some 35 euros. But it is likely to generate twice that in revenue every month. Only 300 of them are in place in Bengaluru and a few other cities right now. There are plans, though, to roll out 100,000 of them to kickstart the green transport revolution and send a signal to policymakers.
Electric vehicles are just the front end. They are already compatible with renewable energy. So even if, let's say today it's just 50% coming from renewable energy, that's just the first step. As and when government takes up the steps of moving to 100% renewable energy, electric vehicles are already compatible. So let's take the first step from our side and start using electric vehicles, and government is obviously doing its part.
Politicians need to provide the framework necessary to make green travel a reality, but it also needs innovative companies like Maladeath and Charger to make it easier for Bengaluru's citizens to make the switch, because ultimately as end users, it's down to them. By opting for an electric motorbike, Varsha Rajiv has already taken that step. Bangalore's other motorbike riders now just have to follow her example. All 5 million of them.
Sustainable energy solutions at scale are the need of the hour for both developed and developing countries. A transition to clean energy, however bumpy the road, will need to be made if our aim is to live on a greener planet. We will continue to bring you many more stories that will help you contextualize the problems and solutions relating to our energy use. I hope you found today's episode informative and helpful. Until next time, goodbye and thanks for watching.